the cost was high. The Royal Air Force lost 106 aircraft, the highest single-day total of the war. The Royal Canadian Air Force lost 13 aircraft. After only 9 hours fighting ashore, the force withdrew. On the night before, 5,000 Canadians left England. Only 2,000 would return. Over 1,000 Canadians were dead and 2,000 prisoners were in German hands. For these, their whole shooting war had lasted less than a day. Many of the prisoners and many of those who got back to England were wounded. Behind the failure at Dieppe lay a poor, overly complex plan, insufficient fire support from aircraft and artillery, and inadequate training of troops for their first test of battle. Yet, lessons were learned for later amphibious landings in the Mediterranean and at Normandy. After the disastrous landing at Dieppe in France, the Allies abandoned more attacks on Europe and concentrated on Sicily and Italy to gain a foothold in Europe. British, Canadian, American, and French forces confronted the Italian-German axis across the desert sweep of northern Egypt and Libya, and in the more hilly coastal areas of Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. RCAF Day Fighter Squadron, number 417, flew Spitfires with the famed Desert Air Force above the armies from the Nile Valley in Egypt to the plains of northern Italy. By the spring of 1943, the United Allied forces from Algeria in the west and Libya in the east had pushed the Germans and remaining Italians into the northeast coast of Tunisia. The aim was to force Italy out of the war. In the summer of 1943, a vicious storm delayed the Sicily landing. Then suddenly, the weather cleared. Catching the enemy off guard, Canadian troops walked into Europe.
The Prime Minister, the Right Honourable W.L. Mackenzie King, has an important message for the people of Canada.
Early on this morning of July the 10th, Allied forces under the command of General Eisenhower, began landing operations in Sicily. All Canada will be justifiably proud to know that units of the Canadian Army are a part of the Allied force engaged in this attack.
The resistance from Italian coastal troops was light. The Canadians pushed forward through choking dust over tortuous, mine-filled roads. At first, all went well. But resistance stiffened. Determined Germans who fought back from the vantage points of towering villages and almost impregnable hill positions engaged the Canadians increasingly. Despite the defensive advantages, the Germans fell to the Canadian assault. Stopped by the Sicilian terrain as much as the German resistance, the ground operations took only 38 days. The Canadians had acquitted themselves well in their first campaign. They had fought through 250 kilometers of mountainous country. In September 1943, General Montgomery, with American, British, and Canadian forces, attacked the boot of Italy. In spite of rain, poor mountain roads, and German rearguard actions, they had moved 120 kilometers inland by September the 10th. Over the next year and a half, the German army defended its positions right across Italy, and many fierce battles ensued in the hills and mountains. Seaside towns and mountain passes became places of horror. The medieval town of Ortona, with its castle and stone buildings, was situated on a ledge overlooking the Adriatic Sea. Its steep, rubble-filled streets limited the use of tanks and artillery, and thus made this an infantryman's struggle. During several days of vicious street fighting, the Canadians smashed their way through walls and buildings. This was Christmas 1943. The city of Ortona lay in ruin, its citizens stunned by the racket of automatic weapons and explosions that had torn apart the silence of its usually quiet streets. Many of the very first Allied soldiers to enter Rome were Canadian commandos in the